Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to AWI DemystiFly Managing Chemical Resistance webinar for advisors. I'm Emily King, AWI National Extension Manager, and I have the pleasure of hosting you today. Wool growers are becoming increasingly concerned with chemical resistance and the limitations this places upon them in managing fly strike risk. Recent research conducted by AWI and New South Wales DPI found increased resistance to many chemicals in blowfly samples. AWI engaged a number of animal health companies and fly researchers to provide technical advice, which has informed the AWI resources you're going to hear about today. And without any further ado, I will now introduce today's first speaker, who is Angela Schuster. Angela co-founded Schuster Consulting Group in 2002, which is a consulting company that collaborates with agricultural industry stakeholders both nationally and internationally. Some of the key areas that Schuster Consulting Group works on are capability building, animal welfare, sustainability, and traceability. Angela and her husband and business partner Peter have also operated since 2008 a wool, beef cattle, dryland and irrigated cropping enterprise in Central West New South Wales. So without any further ado, thanks Ange, I'll hand over to you and we can kick off the good stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So it's estimated that fly strike causes production losses of about 105 million to the industry each year. And it costs 65 million in prevention and treatment to the industry as well. Now, these costs relate to mulesing, pain relief, chemicals, crutching, labour, and those types of preventative and treatment activities. The average annual cost is $2.37 per head. Now, importantly, these figures are actually based on 2015, so they're likely higher now given the current commodity prices. And what we can't put a price on, of course, is the severe pain and suffering that fly strike causes our animals. Now, increasingly, AWI has been hearing comments like you have on the screen in front of you from wool growers. Everything from, I've just used a chemical and it didn't do anything, what's going on? Can I combine two chemicals? You know, I've used this chemical a few years ago, can I use it now? I've heard there's resistance, should I just stop using chemicals? Now, none of this will probably surprise those of you on today's calls, as you've probably heard these types of comments yourselves coming from your clients. Because of this, AWI commenced extension activities to communicate best practice fly strike management activities. Chemical resistance, though, continued to be the burning question raised by growers, with indications it's becoming of increasing concern. And there's quite a lot of confusion about what wool growers should be doing. And additionally, what we were seeing is that advisors were seeking clarification from AWI as well about best practice chemical use to minimise resistance. AWI established the Blowfly Chemical Resistance Communication Strategy Working Group, that is a mouthful, and the aim of that group was really to contribute to a strategy to communicate key messages in relation to chemical resistance to wool growers and their advisors. Now, the group included researchers, which included Dr. Peter James, who's on our call today and is going to be available to answer some questions, as well as animal health companies and adult learning and communication experts. Importantly, the messages that were going to be communicated about this burning issue needed to be practical, relevant, clear, and implementable to reduce potential inconsistencies in the advice being received by wool growers. Now, with the range of other fly strike extension activities AWI was implementing, all of the resources and tools that related to chemical resistance needed to work with the other components of AWI's fly strike extension program. And we'll actually hear more about that whole program throughout this webinar as well. Now, ultimately, what the resources and tools needed to ensure was that wool growers were confident in managing fly strike and chemical resistance, not confused. So as a result of these activities, AWI has released a suite of resources for you as advisors. Now, these are available in hard and soft copy, and they're really there to provide consistent messaging and information for use industry-wide. You can use them in discussions with your clients and provide copies to your clients as well to help understanding. And really what we're going to run through in today's webinar is what those messages are and what those resources are as well, so you can get a feel for what's available to you and also how to access them. So we'll talk you through the messages and we'll provide you with the details. So we're going to start each section off talking about what the key messages are that need to be communicated, and then we'll talk about the resources that are available that can help you communicate those messages with your clients as well. And remember, this is really designed around ensuring wool growers are confident, not confused when it comes to chemical resistance. So a core message through all of AWI's fly strike extension activities is to really ensure a good understanding of the 3 conditions that are required for fly strike. And these are on screen in front of you, and they relate to the presence of susceptible sheep. So that's the presence of sheep with suitable sites for flies to lay eggs on. So that's wet woolen skin around the breech, the pizzle, the back, the pole, and a lot of other factors that make sheep susceptible to fly strike. Now, we're not actually going to talk about those factors today. There are plenty of other activities that AWI has underway for wool growers that talks about what makes sheep susceptible, but that's not what we'll be focusing on today. Obviously, the other 2 conditions for fly strike that are being communicated through all of AWI's extension activities relate to the presence of flies, so that's around successful breeding and hatching events, and weather that favours low fly and allows flies to breed and move around, as well as weather conditions that cause the wool to get wet and to stay wet. So a major part of AWI's fly strike extension program is the concept of a fly strike management toolbox. And the way that this is being presented to wool growers is that there are a number of tools in the toolbox that can be used to manage fly strike. So these include things like monitoring, crutching and shearing, preventative chemicals, managing scouring, dags and stain, paddock selection, reducing fly populations, classing, selection and joining, as well as breech modification or mulesing. Now, one of the key messages throughout everything AWI is doing in relation to fly strike is that an integrated and balanced approach to fly strike management is crucial. There is no silver bullet. For the purpose of this webinar, we're just going to concentrate on the preventative chemical messaging and the tools that AWI has developed around this specific issue. So again, remember, there are a number of tools in the toolbox, but all we really have time to go over today is the focus on the preventative chemicals. Now, these messages fall into 3 categories. They relate to selecting and using chemicals effectively, determining if resistance is a problem, and preventing and managing resistance. So the first section we're going to look at is the selecting and using chemicals effectively. So again, I'm going to go over the key messages that are coming out through the materials and resources and activities that AWI is conducting, and then we'll look at the tools available. And we'll go through this section by section. Emily mentioned questions beforehand. As I go, if you do have any questions, you can pop them in the chat, just type them up. We will just hold off answering questions until the end because you may actually find that as I work through the information, some of your questions may actually be answered. So the use of preventative chemicals is short-term tactical tools. So when we're talking about tools to wool growers, we have short-term tactical tools and long-term strategies. And chemical prevention is one of the tools that's in the short-term tactical toolbox, if you like. And really it's about providing that protection from fly strike for that 4-week to 29-week protection. Obviously that's variable and depends on a number of conditions. Now, I don't need to tell everybody how the chemicals work, but we do spend a bit of time educating growers on how they work. So it's all around the, the way that they affect the nervous system. Now, I'm not going to tell you about that because we have our expert on online today, Dr. Peter James, who will be talking to you about that if you have any questions around how they work and the ins and outs of chemical usage. Now, again, some of the key messages we try to get wool growers to understand here is that the preventative chemicals are residual, meaning that they affect the maggots and flies, but they wear off over time. And that's an important message when we come to the resistance messaging as well. So again, we also talk about the fact that timing's important. So the timing of chemical use and other tools in the fly strike management toolkit, all the timing needs to be considered. So different chemicals can be applied to different wool lengths. They can be used with other tools in combination. So it's really about getting people to think about the timing of all of their activities. And then, of course, effective chemical use is crucial to ensuring the chemicals you use are as effective as possible. Now, some of these messages that may sound pretty basic to you all on today's call, but they're really key messages that we need all wool growers to be across. And the first message that we're really trying to, the first resource that we're trying to describe and explain is really about effective chemical application. So as I said, effective chemical use is absolutely important. And now we actually talk about what effective chemical use looks like. And we have a tool to help wool growers understand this too. So, it starts at things like selecting the right chemical for the job. So the different chemicals and their uses we also cover, so we'll get to that bit. But the first key point is make sure they're selecting the right chemical for the job. And then also applying the right chemical using the right application method. And application method, when we talk about this means that the applicator that comes with the chemical as well, because that's been approved for use with the chemical. And it's also about the application pattern. For example, is it pole tail, is it side? So all of that information needs to be well understood, and the chemical needs to be used that way and applied that way. And we have a lot of questions around this about people, I'm sure we've all heard the story that a wool grower's just grabbed an applicator they have in their shed, and they just keep using that one again and again and again. So again, this is a key message that we need to ensure wool growers are aware of. Applying the right dosage is also important. So this is around ensuring wool growers aren't guessing. So make sure they fill the applicator to the correct dose each time. It's a good idea to check check the dosage, so they can check the dosage by squirting the chemical into a measuring jug and making sure the applicator is drawing the right amount each time. It's also things about making sure they're not doing a half dose or a double dose or something like that. So again, we have a lot of questions when we talk to wool growers around, I only got halfway through, so I just gave them another squirt, or I got halfway through, or I left them like that. So these are all the types of comments that we get from wool growers when it comes to chemical application. Then also checking the wool length is appropriate for the chemical being used. So different chemicals are made to go on different wool lengths. So some can be applied off shears, some can go on long wool, some can go on short wool. So it's really important that the wool length is being considered and the label is checked as part of that. And of course, that leads into the very important point is that wool growers should always read and follow label instructions. Now, the reason we have that at the end is if I put it at the beginning, everybody rolls their eyes and they don't listen anymore. So because it's very obvious when we say it, but we need to get people to understand that they do need to read the label. And it may be, even if they've used the chemical before, it's important to keep current with the labels as well. And of course, very importantly, make sure they're wearing the correct PPE. So that's overalls, gloves, boots, masks, eyewear, etc. They also need to check the intervals for things like sheep rehandling, wool harvesting, and export slaughter, if that's applicable, as well as withholding periods for domestic slaughter. Interestingly, the understanding of some of these intervals and excuse me, and withholding periods is quite low amongst wool growers. So even when we ask them, do they know what a sheep rehandling interval is? a lot of them don't. And a lot of them have not considered that as part of their planning. So when I mentioned earlier about the importance of timing, they also need to consider the sheet rehandling interval as part of their timing when they're thinking of using a chemical too. And of course, keep records. And we talk a lot about records, and you'll hear more about that as we go through today's webinar. And if they haven't already, or it's been a while, they should really be doing a chemical users training course. Now, all of the information that I've just gone through with you is available in an A3 sized standard operating procedure. So it's been designed to be able to be put up in a shed. And so this is one of the resources that you can access that can help you talk through these steps with your clients, and also you can give it to them to take away so that that remains in their mind. And it also helps communicate these points with other staff members, because often someone might get the information, but then making sure the rest of the organisation is familiar with those steps may not happen always. So the idea behind this is that it's a tool for you to reiterate the key points with, and then also the wool grower can take that away and use it in their shed. So our next series of messages is around selecting and using chemicals, and really ensuring chemical groups and actives are being considered by wool growers. And we start with a very basic set of messaging and talk them through what all of this means. So on screen in front of you, a table's going to turn up, and I'll explain what the messages are that we're communicating with wool growers and what's available to you and some of the tools and resources AWI has developed. So we talk about different chemical groups, and then we talk about different active chemicals. So chemical groups have different active chemicals. We don't talk about product names and things like that. This is about making sure the wool growers become familiar with the idea of groups and actives. And then, of course, the application method for the chemicals varies. So some chemicals prevent fly strike and are applied by pour on or spray on, or jetting and dipping. Some are for treating fly strike, some can go on open wounds, and some can't. And as I said earlier, different chemicals can be applied to different wool lengths. And then also the protection period for each chemical varies as well. Now, again, this isn't new content to everybody on this call, but when we're talking to wool growers, sometimes we assume some understanding that they may not have. So it's a good idea to go back to some of these basics with them and try to help them understand. And again, there are some tools that will allow you to communicate that with your clients. So we also just highlight with the wool growers that some chemicals used to treat or prevent fly strike may also be available in formulations used to control lice. So this is an important consideration when you are selecting chemicals for use, is your fly treatments, and that's preventative and dressing, as well as your lice usage. So again, it's always important that they check the label. So one of the tools that's available to you is a quick reference guide. So it's the Fly Strike Prevention and Treatment Chemical Guide, and the information that I've just gone over with you in the table is available on here. There's some additional information on this that I haven't touched on today, but it's a good snapshot, if you like, of the current chemical groups and actives and how they can be used. Now, this is really to help guide discussions, and again, this is not giving them the answer, because they must always read the label, and they really have to consider their own individual circumstances and what else is happening on their farm. So really importantly there, just making sure that when they are looking at this, or if you're talking to this, or even if you're looking at it, remember that this is a snapshot of information. It's a summary only, and you must go and have a look at the labels. And also just to point out that this could change as well. So that's why it's really important to reinforce the messaging of always going back and reading the label. Now, long-term use and over-reliance on just one chemical group for any type of pest control almost always results in resistance if good resistance management plans aren't in place. Now, some of the chemical groups that we have used in the past to rely on for blowfly control are no longer as effective because the blowflies have become resistant to them. Now, what's really crucial for people to understand is that resistance does not mean a failure of the chemical, but rather a shortening of the protection period. So it may be that you're getting 4 to 6 weeks protection period instead of 12 to 14. And this is really a good message to ensure wool growers understand, because rather than them throwing their hands up in the air and saying, well, I just won't bother using chemicals, they just need to understand that the chemicals are still effective. It's just for some, the protection period may not be as long. And you know, we need to understand which chemicals have resistance, and also regional variations as well. So it really shouldn't be just a matter of wool growers throwing their hands up in the air. Now, resistance to diazinon is well known, but there was some research recently from AWI that there is resistance to ceromazine and dicyclonol, but that's in different states. So again, just appreciate there are regional variations in this. There's also cross resistance. So between ceromazine and dicyclonol, there's cross resistance between those. So they are actually in the same group. They're different chemical actives, but they're in the same group, being insect growth regulators. Now, there's also been some resistance to imidacloprid as well, but there is just indications that it's shifting towards that, and it's too soon to tell, and it was in a small sample. Now, again, we've got to understand the regional variations. So for dicyclonol and ceromazine, that's widespread resistance in New South Wales and Victoria, some resistance found in WA and South Australia. Unfortunately, for Tasmania and Queensland, the samples are still too small at this point in time. Now, again, this is where ensuring wool growers understand the idea of chemical groups is really important, and getting them to begin to appreciate the group of chemical that they're using, because we've got so many chemicals out there with different commercial names and things like that. If they want to know, what do I have a resistance problem, they need to understand it's to the active or the product group as well. And again, of course, one of the messages that that we often have to make them aware of is the different concentration levels. So they're not always aware of things that we may be, like particular chemicals might come out in different concentration levels too. So just making sure that different products can have different concentration levels and things like that. So again, just making sure we're educating them about these types of things that some of us just understand, but from widespread understanding with wool growers, that may not be the case. So what we talk about next is determining if resistance is a problem. So the question is always, well, how do I know if I have resistance? And this is where there's some steps and some questions they can ask themselves before they automatically assume they have a resistance problem, because we don't want everybody assuming they have a resistance problem. So there are two indicators of resistance, and the first one is a shortening of the protection period that's specified on the product label. Now, this is despite no change in the application rate, and the chemical was actually correctly applied, and there was also no significant difference in the season outlook or the fly pressure as well, because if some chemicals work under moderate fly pressure, and if the wool grower's been experiencing high fly pressure, then that chemical may not be as effective. So little things like that we need people to understand. Now, they may also see fly strike in multiple sheep that have been treated with the same chemical rather than just a few sheep. So this is where maggots survive and they continue to cause strike. And again, this is despite confidence that the chemical was applied appropriately. And that's a really important point to make, because I'm sure we've probably heard of wool growers, and I'll put my hand up with some of our workmen who've definitely said the sheep were treated, and sometimes they may not have been treated the right way. So it may be a half dose, or the gun jammed or something like that. So again, sometimes you've got to ask some hard questions. Importantly though, and I'll stress again, resistance doesn't mean that chemicals have totally lost effectiveness. It's really around that period of protection could be shorter than what was previously expected. Now, when we talk about protection periods though, there are a number of factors that could reduce a protection period. So before everybody jumps to chemical resistance, we need to sort of work through a bit of a process of elimination, because what will impact protection periods are things like the application method, so the incorrect or inconsistent application. Also, if the sheet have heavy dags, which stop the chemical from reaching the skin, the amount of rain that could cause chemical washout, the degree of fly pressure. So as I said earlier, some chemicals are only effective under low or moderate pressure. And then resistance to the chemical may actually be the reason for the protection period. Wool growers need to make sure they don't take a set and forget approach though. So it's really about making sure that they are recording when they apply their chemicals and then continuing to monitor the effectiveness of that chemical throughout that period of protection. So that will allow them to see whether or not that protection period is reducing or if the chemical is remaining effective. So some hard questions that wool growers need to ask. And, you know, they might not like us answering these questions, but they need to ask, were the struck sheep actually treated? And that's not funny that we actually have to ask that question, because sometimes a sheep may be missed or a number of sheep might not get the right dosage. So there are a number of reasons why someone might answer yes to that question. Was the chemical applied following label instructions? So again, coming back to the right applicator, the right pattern, the right wool length, things like that. Dig dags make penetration of the product difficult. If they've got sheep with high dags and they spray the chemical over the top of the dags, then it's not going to be a particularly effective cover. Was there heavy or persistent rain following treatment which resulted in chemical washout? Now, if a producer can hand over heart answer these questions, then you know, they can eliminate those as reasons for the short-term, for the protection period becoming less, then they should really arrange for a resistance test. Now, New South Wales DPI is conducting resistance testing. This is open to all wool growers around Australia, so not just for wool growers in New South Wales. You can get a collection kit from New South Wales DPI and you collect 60 live healthy Lucilia caprina maggots, and you need to make sure you get the right maggots because the hairy maggots will eat Lucilia caprina, so we need to make sure you get the right maggots to the lab and they'll conduct their test. Now there's a range of chemical actives that are tested, so the testing is around dicyclonol, ceromazine, ivermectin, spinosad and imidacloprid. The pricing ranges from $316 for one chemical group up to about $347 for all 4 chemical groups. And New South Wales DPI will actually provide information on how to read and interpret the results of their test as well. So of course the question we get is, well, how do I arrange a resistance test? So the information that I've just taken you through is available in this one-page document. So it talks about the indicators of resistance and the questions that wool growers should ask. And also then there's information and contact details on there for how to arrange a resistance testing. So this could be something that you could use if a wool grower comes in and says, I've got resistance, actually talk them through what that might actually mean and talk them through the questions and get them to really reflect on the answers to those questions before automatically jumping to a resistance answer. And again, if they're still convinced, arrange some resistance testing. So the next section we cover off with the tools and information that's available is around preventing and managing resistance. So if chemical resistance is already a problem on your client's property, then they need to work on limiting further development of that resistance. And if chemicals are still effective, then they need to work to keep the status for as long as possible. We want to make sure we have access to those chemicals for as long as we possibly can. So this really requires good resistance management, and there are 5 steps to chemical resistance management. So these are good practice whether your client has resistant flies or not. So the first step is really using a range of chemical and non-chemical tools. And remember I said at the beginning there is the fly strike management toolbox, and there's a range of tools available in the toolbox, and it's about using all of those tools in combination. So that's integrated pest management, if you like, and it's really around not relying on one tool. There's no silver bullet for fly strike. Know chemical groups and rotate them where practical. And optimize the number and timing of chemical and non-chemical treatments. So again, this is about using both chemical and non-chemical activities strategically and in combination. For example, crutching to get a period of protection and then using a chemical treatment to extend that protection period later over the fly strike season. And then of course, follow the label directions and keep treatment records. And regularly monitor for fly strike, so always looking for fly strike and kill any maggots from struck sheep. Now, we actually don't talk about this component in today's webinar. It's quite a lengthy component around managing fly populations, but there is quite a bit of information in some of AWI's other extension activities around this step involving managing the fly population. And it's really focused on killing maggots when you're treating struck sheep, and also just making sure that you dispose of carcasses from any sheep that have died of fly strike. So again, we've got some handy resources here to cover off. So on your left, there is a fact sheet which talks about managing chemical resistance. And then there's also that one page that I mentioned earlier, which also has the resistance management steps. The fact sheet on your left has quite a lot of information in it. It's about 6 pages, and it talks about each of the different steps in significantly more detail than I can go into today. And it also has some frequently asked questions and signposts to further resources. Now, when it comes to using chemicals repeatedly, there are 3 considerations. So it's really around considering the chemical group that was last applied either earlier this season or at the end of the previous fly season, and where practical, avoiding using a chemical from the same group next. Then considering the chemical group that was last used to control lice, and avoid using a chemical from the same group for the next preventative fly strike application in the same season. And finally, considering the chemical group or groups that were last applied to prevent fly strike, and avoid using these as a dressing to treat struck sheep this season. Now, fly strike prevention is really complex, and these are very simplified guidelines. So they're really designed to ensure we continue to have effective chemical use, but there is quite a bit more that you need to consider, and that's where it comes down to the individual circumstance of the wool grower and working out what timing they have for other fly strike management activities and how chemicals need to work in with those. So again, another resource that you can access from AWI is the Guide to Fly Strike Chemical Rotation, which really touches on the 3 considerations I just talked about there then. So looking at prevention, lice control, and your treatment or dressing. Now, AWI has also developed a fly strike chemical selection wheel. So this is really to help you help your clients consider different approaches to fly strike chemical use. It includes consideration of chemical groups that have formulations for both fly and lice control, but the lice control only focuses on those that have a formulation for fly. So it's not there to help with lice chemical selection. It's there just to help guide discussions around fly strike chemical use. So the wheel has 4 discs and it spins independently, and it's designed to spin up different options for prevention, lice and dressing until there's a combination that works for the wool grower, so it's practical. And it also reflects good practice and resistance management that we've heard about. So the information contained on the disc includes the group name, the active name, and also the application method. It doesn't go into detail about timing and interval, mainly because you wouldn't be able to fit all of that on the resource. So it's really there to help guide discussions and considerations. It needs to be used in consideration of other aspects like, as I've said, application method, timing of other activities, label protection periods, and withholding periods or intervals that best suit your client's specific situation. So when you are working through this, you can actually have a conversation with your client around, so here's our one we use on our property. You can actually have a conversation around your client with what they've used in terms of prevention and what they've used or what they want to use. And then you can also have a conversation around what they may, another prevention treatment they may need, and then what they've used for lice, and then what they're looking at using for addressing. So there's instructions on the front of it, and there's more information that you can access on the back as well as online. And it's really designed to help you work out the way you should be going and where you could direct clients to. Again, coming back to the point that this doesn't consider other things like the individual circumstances of the wool grower, so their timing and their strategic approach to fly strike management, because that's unique to them, and also their chemical resistance profile. So you need to look at that too. So the way that you could use this tool is if a wool grower comes in and talks about, okay, well, I might have resistance, or I need to use, I've got fly strike, what can I use? Obviously dialing up and working through a series of questions that are based on the information in front, where you ask, you know, what are you looking at using? What did you use last? What would you like to use? What did you use for lice and dressing? And you can dial up a range of different options, so different color coding is coming up in front of you. The idea is that you don't have the same color more than once in the window. So you can see the different colors coming up, and here's an example where you've got two chemicals from the same group. So if you go back to what we were talking about with the resistance management steps and the guide to chemical rotation, you want to try to avoid this situation where you've got two chemical groups coming up in the same in the window, so the same color, as far as practically possible. And so good tool to use when wool growers are planning their fly strike management activities, so they can look at how they're going to use chemicals and when they're going to apply them using this as well. So of course, really important, we need to encourage wool growers to keep records. Now this is important for compliance purposes like livestock production assurance, as well as marketing purposes, but it's also really important for tracking chemical effectiveness. If they can't remember when they applied the chemical, they're not really going to know whether or not they've got the protection period they were expecting. Again, I know that sounds really obvious, but we really need to make sure wool growers are aware of this. So getting them to record when they're applying their chemicals and what they're noticing, and monitoring for resistance. So again, not setting and forgetting, but continuing to monitor their sheep for fly strike, and then if they have resistance concerns, getting some of that, going through those questions to really reflect on whether they've applied the chemical correctly, but also then arranging for a chemical resistance test. So also available to you are a couple of case studies that look at chemical resistance in a non-mulesed enterprise as well as a mulesed enterprise. So we often get questions around whether or not chemicals in a non-mulesed enterprise, you need more or less, and likewise in a mulesed environment, what's the difference between not just chemicals but all of the other fly strike management tools that are available. So there are a couple of case studies here that look at how different wool growers have used different chemicals, and one of them is on our property. So as Emily said at the beginning, we run about 10,000 merino sheep, and we went to non-mulesed, and we talk about here what our experiences have been, not only moving that way, but also looking at chemical resistance and the steps we take on our farm to ensure our chemicals are effective and we have access to them for as long as possible. So there's also a range of frequently asked questions. So the questions when you talk to wool growers, as I'm sure you experience, just flow thick and fast. So there's a document that's been prepared capturing, I guess, the major questions that AWI keeps experiencing, and obviously this bank can be added to over time. So I guess the burning question for you was how to access the resources, and you can actually order them for free from AWI. You can download the soft copies. There's a website address that's coming up in front of you, and you'll get access to the links that I'll show you today. You'll get those after the webinar, and they'll be sent around. So I was just checking the handout, but you can access that there, and you can see each of the different documents, and you can order them from AWI. And again, they're free for you. So if you need them, take advantage of the opportunity. Now, I just want to touch on really quickly before I finish up and we hook to some questions around what other tools and resources are out there that would be really useful for you as wool grower advisors. So there's a few other ones. So the FlyBoss website and the Paraboss website both have a couple of great opportunities there for wool grower advisors. On FlyBoss, there is a lice and fly strike product tool. So this one allows you to look up different products or different parasites and select the different application methods, and then it gives you a range of products that are available along with information on protection periods and intervals and things like that. There's also a fly strike risk simulator. Now this is a great tool to help wool growers plan that integrated pest management approach. So looking at what they could be doing to minimize their risk of fly strike throughout the fly strike season, and looking at the different chemical and non-chemical options they have available to them. So it lets you pick all sorts of different things on there. There's one tool that you can use online, and there's another more detailed tool that you can download and use on your computer. And then also Paraboss has available the certificate in sheep parasite management. So if you really wanted to get into the detail around parasite management in sheep, there is a full certificate course available through Paraboss as well. So this webinar is a range of initiatives from AWI that's been designed for advisors and wool growers on fly strike management. And I'm just going to quickly touch on the other initiatives that are available or soon to be available. So It's Fly Time is a 1-hour webinar for wool growers designed at looking at those, what they can do in the lead up to high risk fly periods. So it's all around short-term management of fly strike. Obviously, DemystiFly is what we're here today talking about. So it's managing blowfly chemical resistance. SimpliFly is a 1-day workshop that's designed to develop a strategic fly strike management plan and calendar. So a lot of what I've talked to you about today is around optimizing the timing of chemical and non-chemical treatments, and SimpliFly is there to help wool growers work through that process. Classifly is a 1-day workshop designed to increase skills and awareness in breeding for fly strike resistance. And these so far are available to all sheep growers. Stratifly and Amplify are designed for wool growers, and particularly merino wool growers who are considering moving to non-mules. So Stratifly is really there to help develop a whole of farm plan, and then Amplify is advisor coaching. So advisors can tap into that and provide one-on-one coaching to wool growers to help them move to a non-mules enterprise. So just quickly on timing, the Classifly, Stratifly and Amplify are still under development, and they'll be coming late this year and next year. But DemystiFly, obviously we're here today, SimpliFly and It's Fly Time are currently available as well. All right, so I'm going to pass back to you, Emily, for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Ange. Thanks very much for that. Very informative, as always. And just as Ange mentioned, just in reiterating from the start, that order form to order any of these bits and pieces that Ange has been mentioning from us, if you'd like a hard copy version, that'll be coming out in the email after when we send out the webinar recording as well. So you can order any of those that you would like to have on hand to use with clients or in workshops or the like. Please do continue to put your questions into the question panel. And Ange, to give you a little bit of a break for a second, I'll now introduce Dr. Peter James because we're going to move into the question section. Peter will be familiar to many of you, of course, but I will introduce him anyway to you. Peter's main area of interest is in new technologies and integrated approaches to the control of pests and parasites associated with domestic livestock species. He has been involved with research and extension on sheep ectoparasites for more than 30 years across Australia. So welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining us for question time today.
Thanks, Emily. Afternoon, everybody.
Okay, to the questions. So I might, I'll just pose this to you, Ange and Peter, and feel free to, whichever one of you is the more relevant, you can jump in. So the first question here is, are properties that don't mule using more fly chemical treatments than they were before stopping mulesing?
Do you want me to take this one, Ange, or are you going to?
You can start, and then if I can talk from our own experience.
Yeah, give you a bit of a rest. Look. It depends on how well or how far along the line they've got to actually breeding more resistant sheep. If the sheep are more resistant and other procedures are being used as well as they can, it may not be more chemical. In a lot of the time, though, it does initially rely a little bit more on chemicals, so there is a bit more chemical use. Just in this this space, one other comment I'd make about this, and we haven't talked about it an awful lot, is tail length sort of gets passed over a lot, and we know that from the surveys that most growers use tail length. Use correct tail length most of the time, but just the point I would make about this is that tail length is much more important when you've got unmuled sheep. In muled sheep, it's not quite so important, but if you've got unmuled sheep, the wool can grow longer down around the sides of the tail, and if there's not a lot of tail left there to sort of hold the wool out of the way, that wool tends to get more stained and the sheep more susceptible to strike. So it's worth just spending a bit more time on tail length than on mule sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Emily, if I might just add from our own personal experience, tail length moving to non-mules, it's been a game changer for us. So we have gone longer than normal. So the recommendation is between the third and fourth palpable joint. That's a lot longer than a lot of people are used to, so it takes a little bit to get used to seeing it in the paddock. But for us, that has definitely been a game changer. We actually have a small portion of a mob whose tails were docked too short, unfortunately, and they are our biggest fly strike risk. So they've been our biggest headache in terms of fly strike. So it's actually a really interesting sort of controlled environment where we've got sheep that have the right length and short tails, and the short tails are giving us absolute growth.
Excellent, thank you. Some good seeing it in practice as well. Well, not good for you, of course, but a nice anecdote. What evidence is there for insecticide resistance thus far in Tasmania?
We haven't. Look, I don't know whether Angela, you've spoken to Narelle recently, or, but well, I'm not sure how much has actually been done. One comment I would make about Tasmania is that there is some information that suggests that other species of flies might be more important down there than they are in the rest of Australia. Lucilia caprina is still the main one, but even so you might expect from that point of view that resistance would be less of a problem. But Angie, if you've got comments from Narelle, that'd be good.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So unfortunately, the sample sizes just aren't there with Tasmania. So there's, in the most recent round of testing, there was one usable sample, and I think with the report that came out with AWI, there were no samples. So the one sample did have resistant to seromazine, but not to cyclonol. But again, that's one sample. So unfortunately, we need to get more Tasmanians testing.
Absolutely, that'll be a definite push from AWI for this coming season. So we look forward to seeing lots more Tasmanian samples, and then we can give you a more clear picture of what's happening down there. Okay, so what are the benefits of either crutching or using a tail cutter, for example, like we do with using long-acting drenchers? So what are the benefits of crutching or using a tail cutter at the end of the season?
The use of the tail cutter is primarily to manage resistance, and I'm guessing the question is about using those two strategies for managing resistance. There's my comment would be that usually if you're thinking of using, this is at the end of the season or basically after the treatment, usually for reasons to do with the biology of the parasites, it's not going to help you very much with sheep blowfly strike. It might help you a little bit, crutching off the wool that's got a bit low concentrations of pesticide there. But basically, what you'll be doing anyway is planning that treatment based on what you expect the fly strike situation to be going forward. In comparison to, the difference from worms is that with worms you're treating the sheep, and therefore all the worms that you basically get treated, and therefore that, and that has an effect in, you use a different chemical group. So if you've actually built up any resistance, the objective is to wipe out all those worms that are in the sheep with a different chemical group. With fly strike, that effect only occurs when you get strike. So if you're doing it at the end of the flies aren't on the sheep for most of the time. So if you're doing it at the end of the season, if the flies don't strike the sheep, you don't have any effect in terms of resistance management at all. So the short answer is basically, in my view anyway, is basically use crutching at the end of the season or a different chemical at the end of the season, with regard to controlling flies. If you don't expect to have any flies, base your decisions on management situations, or so not. I don't think in most instances with fly strike, a tail cutter is going to help a lot much.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, in southern DAG areas, how practical is it to move to non-mules if merinos have a high breech wrinkle score?
Do you want to do that one, Peter? Or
sure. Look. All of these things are going to depend on your particular situation, and there's not a one answer to that. If you're thinking of doing it with really wrinkly sheep, and you know you're going to get a lot of strike, you've got to be prepared to be monitoring a lot more, to be doing other things. If you're in an area where strike's only down south, where strike's only a problem in some years, maybe in pastoral areas, for example, in pastoral areas you probably won't be using chemicals anyway. But there you might take the risk of doing it. But basically, if you've got wrinkly sheep in a high rainfall area, you probably need to concentrate on getting rid of the wrinkles, or reducing it first.
Excellent point, I think, Peter, about it's all about what your goals are and what you're willing to accept and how you'd like to manage your own sheep. So I think that's a good point. Does dermo affect the protection period of products, particularly spray-on products?
Look, we know it does with lice control products, for example. I haven't actually seen any results of the application with dermo affected sheep, but I think that the expectation is that if particularly if you've got heavily dermo sheep, it's going to reduce the, there's going to be a risk. You're much better off to try and, if you can, to get rid of to shear that dermo off first, and then treat if at all practical.
One of the important things with that, Emily, is just that dermo is a risk factor in fly strike. So when we talked at the beginning about what makes a sheep susceptible, that's one of the things. If you have sheep that are susceptible to fleece rot, dermo, and a lot of other conditions, then you're increasing your risk of fly strike, full stop.
Excellent.
Yeah. And it's probably also, just following up on Angela's point, it's probably worthwhile when you're making a lot of your decisions to actually think about what sort of strike you're going to have, because very often the answer about what you do is going to be very different if you're trying to protect against body strike as well as breech strike at the same time. As from if you haven't got fleece rot and breech strike's your big problem, the approach might be quite different.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, should we be making recommendations for combination treatment with fly treatments, particularly early in the season? I would assume that's meaning, should we be recommending that people apply 2 products at once to get a combination?
Yeah. The short answer for that is we don't have any commercial combination products. So as soon as you start mixing compounds, you're basically doing an off-label use, and if that causes you some problems, you're liable to prosecution. The other thing is that there's also the potential risk that the formulations of the two might interact and you get nasty outcomes that you didn't really anticipate. So if it's not indicated on the label, unless indicated by a veterinarian as an off-label use, you shouldn't be doing it.
Sure, yep. Quick and easy answer. Okay, is there any point testing for resistance when you already have resistance to multiple chemical groups? Will testing give you an indication that it's increasing or declining? So I'm assuming that means that you've already had resistance testing done and you know that you have actual resistance, not just assumed resistance on farm.
I think in the first instance, you just have to manage to that level of to the resistance expectations that you saw last time. Now, with some resistances, if you don't use a chemical group over a period of time, there's some degree of reversion, but we haven't got any good information on this at this stage. So I think it's basically in the short term, you just got to assume that you've still got the resistance there. It's probably a good idea to go back after a couple of years and have another one done, just in case you've got different fly populations, or you have through good procedures, sort of reduce resistance a bit. With flies, there's always the possibility that the flies can come from somewhere else with a lower level of resistance, but for the most part, they're bred on your property, and that's only going to be a helpful element, if you like, over an extended period of time.
Yep. Okay, another question here, and this will be the last one. How about the use of equipment for applying chemicals that are not listed on the Fly Strike Chem Guide, Ange, but they are widely used, such as an electro dip?
So is the question whether they use them, or? No,
the question is what about the use of equipment for applying chemicals? And Karen has just said that they're not on the table, but they are widely used.
I'm not quite sure what the question is. Sorry, Emily, is it?
I think she's saying they're not on the table. We haven't included them.
Yeah, look, I think the people who've used the electro dip say they get really good results. I must admit, I haven't had anything to do with the current versions of the electro dip. I don't think we really have any good information about electro dip, and I think what actually happens in practice is people sort of treat electro dips as a jetting race, and I think that even though it's not on the label, I think the default interpretation is that if it's used for jetting, you can put it through an electrodip. But yeah, there's never been in the registration procedure any specification of electrodips, about whether they do or whether they don't. So I'm sorry, I can't give you any prescriptive answer there, and I think it's one of those things that's going to go with experience. But if it's not registered for jetting, I'd suggest that you should be putting it through an electrodip.
Thank you. Yeah, and Karen has just replied and said, thanks, that's answered my question. So that's very good, thank you. I think she was just looking for a little bit of more information there. Perfect. Well, thank you both very, very much for your time and for the presentation today. Really appreciate it. I would just like to now, I guess, get in a quick plug for AWI's State Grower Extension Networks, and we've just popped a bit of a map on to show you what the names of those are in every state. We've got one in every wool growing state in Australia that we work with, and the contact details for those can be found through wool.com/networks. And I'd encourage you to have a chat with those guys if you're looking at doing an extension that is related to sheep in your state, and certainly have a chat with them. And quite often we can help you promote it or partner with you and that sort of thing. So please do let us know. And of course, and also did a bit of a promo earlier for the AWI Fly Strike Extension Program and all of those upcoming workshops, and these will be rolling out through our grower extension networks right across Australia. Thanks.